Sure, I would do it.
Then I nominate Cliff.
Second. But Susan,
Any
is there
other
not a sitting
considerations?
vice
We
chair
won't, we won't be able to vote. We're just going to pass this along
Yeah,
with our
okay.
thoughts. We'll,
Sorry.
Melanie is
Got it.
chair, and I would be vice chair. We won't vote on it, but we have a consensus of the policy committee to pass that along to the board. Consent agenda item.
Can they hear me or not?
I don't know if they can.
Or do you have to be
We have a consent agenda discussion item to approve TBARTA Policy Committee meeting minutes for June 4th. Again, we won't be able to vote, but is there any changes or modifications to the consent agenda from any board members?
I don't have any changes or comments to make with regard to this issue, or the, yeah.
Neither do I.
Is Commissioner Kemp there?
I am.
Yeah.
Do you have
any changes
I
or
haven't heard.
concerns?
With the consent, or what are you, I'm sorry,
Consent agenda item, yes. The minute, and the only consent agenda item is the minutes from June 4th meeting. If there's any changes or modifications
No,
that
I
need to
have
be made.
nothing.
Discussion items. Chair recognizes Scott Pringle. Regional Transit Feasibility Plan review.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everybody. Scott Pringle with WSP. This morning, I'm going to give you an update on where we are on the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. The last time I had the opportunity to address TBARTA board members was in April. And since then, we've done a lot of work in going out and listening to the comments from the community, and I'm going to walk you through some of that. However, I'm going to first start off with, kind of taking a step back and talking about where we started with the plan, what was the original goals and intents of the plan. Obviously, we in Tampa Bay, we all know the growth that we're experiencing. Here's some stats that are based on the last 5 years of census data projected out for the next 10 years, where we're looking at easily another 500,000 people moving to the 3-county area, 97 million vehicle miles traveled on our roadways, and over a quarter of those on our regional roadways, which are our interstates and expressways.
Catherine Starkey.
The next slide.
Good morning, Catherine.
Good morning. Hi, how are you?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The next slide is just a recap. One of the first things we did is look at all the other work that's occurred in Tampa Bay over the last 30 years. We've had a lot of planning studies, over 55 different planning studies, and none of them have actually received capital grant dollars from the FTA program.
We're picking up some background noise from the last call-in.
It's Catherine's phone. Catherine, look, can you mute your phone?
I have to go back to my phone.
Thank you. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the real question was, when we were starting the regional plan, is what is different about the regional transit feasibility plan? And really, it's about moving beyond the visioning that we've done a great job with over the last 30 years. Really getting down to the point of identifying a potential project that we could move forward with now. So a feasibility plan, just a quick reminder, a feasibility plan is generally looking at a feasible project concept that is essentially a corridor and a mode, and most importantly, it's identifying sort of what those key community and design questions are related to that feasible project. So the purpose of the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan was twofold. First, identify and revalidate the vision for the Tampa Bay area. But then, as I mentioned before, moving beyond that visioning, looking for a catalyst project. And ideally, that catalyst project is something that serves the region and that competes effectively for those federal and state grant dollars. And really, it's the first of many, and the whole point is that it can serve all the other aspects of that regional vision. So as we progress through the technical process, essentially the first year or so of the plan, one of the first major technical milestones was the identification of that regional vision. You can see over 20 plus different projects here on the map. The list of the projects is there to the right. All of these projects are derived from the MPO, Long Range Transportation Plan, as well as the TBARTA 2015 Master Plan Update. We began with all those projects and really narrowed them down. I think it was 87 plus projects, narrowed them down to the 20 plus projects here to create that core vision for Tampa Bay. The next major technical milestone was to take that vision and then start looking at what are the top performing projects out of that vision. And we identified 5. You can see them listed here on your map. They are the I-275 corridor, Tampa to Brandon, Clearwater to Gateway, Tampa to South Tampa, and we also identified the St. Petersburg to St. Pete Beach. That's the Central Avenue BRT, which is well on its way entering into design, and hopefully will be our first project in Tampa Bay to receive those FTA capital dollars. One comment I do want to make is because we're going to have a conversation about that CSX corridor, we did look at the entire Brooksville line as part of that vision. And as we began looking at the metrics associated with that project, it was clear to us early on that the top performing segment of that corridor was the USF to Tampa, and that's why we're identifying it here as our top 5 corridor projects. So after we got through that second milestone,
just
yes,
ask, why do you say it's USF to Tampa when it's not to USF?
The USF area. That's a better description.
It's to Nebraska Avenue and Fowler from downtown, and you skipped the USF area that had 45,000 students and 25,000 jobs, correct?
Well, and based on the conversations you and I have had publicly, Commissioner, we have documented that that corridor should consider extension to the university, so thank you. So after going through step 2, each step of the technical process was, satisfying different elements of the FTA federal guidelines. And as we got to step 3, we began assigning modes to these different corridors and really identified 2 top projects. That is a BRT or rubber tire concept on 275 and an urban rail concept on CSX. Now, at this time in step 3, we are actually looking at a rubber tire concept that was in its own transit way, the entire length of the I-275 corridor, effectively in the median, which of course had a lot of cost implications to it. And same thing with the CSX corridor. We're actually looking at a double track, light rail type of service from the USF area to downtown Tampa. And what we found is that the costs associated with both those projects, while they did well in all the other FTA criteria, they still weren't meeting the cost effectiveness criteria of $10 per trip annually. So it's really at this point where we took a step back and we conducted a value engineering exercise. The value engineering exercise is focused on looking at what the ridership was telling us our region could support as far as a capital investment. So we looked at the ridership, we looked at how much it would cost to operate that service, and that effectively gave us a budget on the capital side that was the foundation for our value engineering exercise. So once we knew the budget, then we started going back and looking at the existing assets that are out there today and how we can leverage those existing assets. And that's how we developed these 2 concepts, which were the primary point of conversation over the last year. The first concept is the rubber tire on I-275, but this concept is using dedicated shoulders. So looking at opportunities to use the existing right-of-way of the interstate, widening the shoulders, hardening the shoulders, 15-foot wide shoulders, 10-foot dedicated lane for transit. And we came down to a price of about $380 to $455 million to build that project in cooperation with FDOT for the full 41 miles. Same conversation on the CSX corridor. Instead of looking at double tracking the corridor.
I have another question.
Sure.
Just to be clear, none of that $455 million goes to creating the dedicated shoulder, correct?
Yeah, a significant portion of the cost for creating the dedicated shoulder would be in partnership with the department. The concept there is the opportunity to flex federal highway dollars to benefit the transit project. So it would be part and parcel of the interstate modernization concept.
So that exists outside of any of this?
Correct. Yeah, these costs do not include that hardening of that shoulder.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thanks.
And then the CSX urban rail corridor, we looked at that existing freight corridor. Instead of doing a double track light rail, we looked at a rail vehicle that can use the freight corridor, use that single track today with sidings. And with that, we also found a cost benefit from that, getting the prices down to $490 to $620 million for that 9-mile corridor. Now, when you start putting those two concepts...
Can I ask another question?
Sure, Commissioner.
You have a 9-mile corridor for $620 million. A single track, not improved at all to double track. Why did your numbers come out so different than Sunrail, which is double tracked and has the stations and everything else in Orlando just 2 years ago for $12 million a mile? And yours is like $75 million a mile, and it's not even improved like Sunrail is.
It is $55 million per mile approximately.
As opposed to $12 million that it costs for Sunrail.
And it includes all the improvements that would be required at the crossings, because we're looking at an existing freight corridor that doesn't have a lot of freight traffic. So there are safety concerns at those crossings, especially for increasing the frequency of the trains coming through that corridor. You know, we're going from something that's, 3 to 4, trains a day to, every 10 to 15 minutes. We do include cost for upgrading the existing freight rail corridor to be ready to handle passenger rail, whereas it is basically designed for freight today. And we also have cost in there for what we call sidings, and that allows that more frequent service along the corridor. It gives tracks for trains to bypass each other and keep a very frequent service. Because what we found in that CSX, that USF to downtown Tampa corridor, is that it really doesn't need a commuter style of rail service. It needs a more urban style of rail service, which means closer station spacing, more stations, and more frequent service.
That's the same as Sunrail. But you've calculated out, Sunrail did this for $12 million a mile and double tracked it. So you're saying it's $43 million more a mile here than what they did in Orlando through an urban area with stations a mile apart, built the stations, double tracked it, did high quality locomotives, everything else, but it's going to cost $43 million more a mile here.
Well, and I would need to verify your figure on the 12 million per mile. I think I need to, before our next meeting, I'll go back and look at that.
Which should have been done way before, because I've asked for it forever, but okay.
Well, and I will look at that, and I'll bring it back to
you. Need to make sure, Scott, this is Kathleen, you need to make sure that what your number is contains, the comparison is apples to apples, because it could be piecemeal with other funding sources.
Yes, that is correct. That is my assumption. That's what I would like to take a little deeper look at and bring back at the next meeting.
Yeah.
And I think now that it's been brought up for discussion today, we'll make sure that is addressed at our board meeting. And thanks for bringing that up.
Will do. Thank you.
Please continue.
So we started going down and looking, comparing the two concepts to each other. And again, coming back full circle to the purpose of that catalyst, looking at a project that serves that entire vision. When you look at the CSX corridor, it does serve 2 regional activity centers, a lot of employment centers along the way. It connects to 7 different vision corridors of that 20+ vision network that I identified in step 1. And it does serve an active transit project, which is the Tampa streetcar. Now, when you go and look at the I-275 corridor, we're serving 6 activity centers and employment centers. It does serve or connect to over 16 of the vision corridors out of that 20+ vision network. And it does serve 2 active transit projects, which is the Tampa streetcar and the Central Avenue BRT. Again, comparison between the two, working towards the identification of that draft catalyst. We're looking at, does the project serve the 3-county area, the study area that identified as part of the regional plan? The 275 corridor does serve all 3 counties, where the CSX corridor serves Hillsborough. And all along since January, we've been very forthright in identifying that both of these are great projects. And they've been part of our conversation in this region for quite a few years. And they both, with the work that we've done on the regional plan, have the potential to compete for those federal and state grant dollars. The only element out of those federal guidelines that differentiates the two is the cost effectiveness. Whereas the rubber tire concept does meet the $10 mark that FTA outlines, the CSX corridor does not. Now, there are other considerations. The commissioner brought that up, and it has to be, anything on the interstate needs to be done in coordination with FDOT's plans moving forward. Whereas on the CSX corridor, obviously to either lease or purchase or get use of that right away does require negotiations with CSX. So with those comparisons, we did identify or recommend the I-275 corridor as the draft catalyst project. I'm going to walk you through in a little bit more detail the composition of that draft catalyst. And keep in mind, this is what we took out to the public for comment. We also took the CSX corridor out for comment, but identified the 275 corridor as that draft catalyst. So when you look at the catalyst, you can see the areas where we recommended dedicated transit lanes. That is St. Pete up into the Gateway area, West Shore to Tampa, Tampa up through the USF area, and in Wesley Chapel. I have a couple of images there that shows a rough typical of what the corridor could look like, as well as an international example from South America. Those dedicated lanes, we're also talking about making sure that they're clearly marked for transit use only, opportunities for separating them from other general traffic movement. And of course, I think we need to look at opportunities for both physical and electronic enforcement, just to make sure that the transit vehicle has the space to make those connections quickly and efficiently. Now, there are 2 elements of the draft catalyst where we didn't recommend dedicated lane. That was going across the bridge, the Howard Franklin Bridge. And the concept here was using the future plans for the Howard Franklin Bridge replacement in those express lanes. The benefit to transit here is that it's a long span of the corridor where we don't have any stations, we're not picking anybody up, we're not dropping anybody off. So to reduce your investment in capital really helped the project. So that was part of that draft catalyst. And you'll hear as we go through the comments we got back from the public, I think there's definitely still a lot of conversation on the Howard Franklin Bridge and how do we handle that with this project moving forward. Now, in the portion from Beers Avenue up to just about the Pasco County line, same example, we have a large area of conservation space where there are no stations, no opportunity where we're picking people up or serving riders. Again, we, as the draft catalyst, recommended the potential for operating in mixed traffic to, keep that capital investment to match the ridership demand. Stations was a big conversation of the draft catalyst. We're really looking at the vast majority of the stations actually not being in the interstate envelope, but being at street level, with the exception of possibility at the West Shore, future West Shore Intermodal Center. And of course, we're really looking for that premium experience. So that's one of the reasons why we keep calling it rubber tire. We're definitely looking for something that has rail-like amenities and rail-like conveniences to it along the corridor. So with that draft concept, we went out to the public. You can see some of the statistics here. We had our forum. We met with the business community. We met with a lot of stakeholders, also community meetings. We also received a couple of endorsements. You can see them listed here from the City of St. Pete, Ford Pinellas, and Pasco County, NPO. And what we heard back from the public, particularly from our survey, was that when we asked the question about the draft catalyst, is this project worth constructing? 77% of the participants said that yes, it was worth constructing. They felt it was a great start. And really, I think the vast majority of folks in the survey really identified it as a great opportunity to ease congestion along the interstate. But we also asked the question, what would you change about the draft catalyst? And the comments that we got back was they'd like to see it expanded, so maybe connect to more areas within our region, and then that conversation about maybe possibly having more dedicated lanes along the corridor. So beyond just the community vetting process, we also went out and had a series of independent reviews on the draft catalyst. We met with the Urban Land Institute of Tampa Bay. We met for the Center of Urban Transportation Research at USF, the Cutter Department. We also had 2 or 3 workshops with the Hillsborough County Planning Commission. We got input from them as well. And we did meet with the Institute of Transportation and Development Policy, ITDP, and that is the international group that sets BRT gold standards and silver standards and bronze standards. So with that public input, with what we heard back from those independent reviews, I'm going to go through some of the top comments that were received on that draft catalyst. So the first, as I mentioned before, there's a lot of conversation about how much dedicated lanes does there need to be in that interstate corridor. Does there need to be a dedicated lane across the Howard Franklin Bridge? Do we need to have dedicated lanes all the way from the USF area up into Pasco County? And with that investment in dedicated lanes, we also had a lot of conversation about, okay, how do we actually get access to the stations? If they're at street level, they're in the community, how does that actually occur? How do we get that direct access? So these are excellent questions that can be advanced to the next phase, which is that project development environment, or PD&E. And it is particularly appropriate for studying these type of design questions in a PD&E. And of course, it does have the potential to increase the project costs, but I think it's an important aspect if this project moves forward into PD&E, should be the focus of that next step. We also heard a lot of conversations about economic development around those stations, the TOD potential. Heard that from the ITDP group as well as the ULI Tampa Bay chapter. We still have to do the environmental compliance and actually identify specific station locations through that process, which is part of the next step, which is that PD&E. So I think if this project moves forward, the concept is focus on how do we make sure we get that economic development, integrate those stations effectively into the community, and really look for opportunities for public-private partnerships. We had a comment from Cutter, and the conversation there was about evaluating a more frequent service on the draft catalyst. We informally looked at what the impact of adding more frequency to that corridor would be, and we saw a vast improvement in ridership. It had a very strong correlation between how frequent the service ran and how much ridership we were getting. But again, another great opportunity to evaluate that in more detail during the PD&E. We also heard comments from... Yes.
Scott, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
By not including Pasco County with a dedicated lane, I'm wondering if what the savings time is for the residents of Pasco County, and if in your residents of Pasco County and the business felt about that.
I think you broke up a little bit. Do you mind repeating? I apologize.
Yeah, take off my ear. So by not including dedicated lanes from Pasco County, the buses will just be in the same traffic jam as everybody else, and I just wondered how that fared with our business community and our residents. Were they happy about that? No issue with that, or what?
No. We did have dedicated lanes recommended as part of the draft catalyst up in Wesley Chapel, but it's just that segment in North Hillsborough County right up to the Pasco County line. But we did get a lot of comments back from Pasco residents and the business community, very interested in the potential of having that being fully dedicated throughout. We had a great conversation at the Pasco MPO, and that was a big point, or big aspect of the conversation. And I believe the Pasco MPO resolution of endorsement included emphasizing looking at the having fully dedicated all the way up through Pasco. So, and as I mentioned, these are the things that we're hearing about that draft catalyst. that are perfect for evaluating during the PD&E. So during the PD&E, should we look at the entire corridor being 100% dedicated or some combination there within?
Or, you know, maybe it's not reality that it all starts out, but I think there needs to be that promise that we're going to look to finding a solution to not have that bottleneck over there where Flatwoods is, and getting a dedicated lane, even though I understand cost is a factor, but I think we should have a plan to get it eventually.
Agreed. And you'll see, Commissioner, in I think towards my concluding slides, the concept of, as we go into the PD&E, looking at how this project, if it advances, is phased, to your exact point. You know, are there phasing opportunities as well?
Well, that's a perfect segue for me to say that I didn't get a copy of your presentation. I wish I had been emailed one so I could follow along. So I'm just kind of following along blindly, but I'll go back to mute and listen along.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner.
And Scott,
Yes.
before you start again, may I just offer a suggestion?
Sure.
Several times thus far, I've heard you say, if we get to the PD&E phase, and I think it would be a stronger, better, more positive message if you could substitute the word when instead of the word if,
Okay.
because I think we have just, you know, used that word for way too long and in time, and I believe that the majority of us on this board are very focused on getting things done. And that doesn't mean just study after study after study after study. So can you please use the word when so that we can keep on moving forward?
Will do, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Scott, I need a quick moment to follow up on something. Susan, will you make sure that the draft analysis for the feasibility plan is emailed to the policy committee members for me?
Yes.
Yes.
They should have the ability to
Yes.
review it.
Thank
You can
you.
make it
I
PDF
didn't
and send it out, or a link.
I didn't get it from Sue either, and I had to get mine from Brad and Debbie early this morning. So I apologize if I'm not really up to speed. It's a bit to digest at the 11th hour.
Well, it's a really, really good report, and everybody should have an opportunity to go through it in some detail. And Scott's doing a great job with overview, but I'd like to get it out to each member.
Will do, absolutely.
Thank you.
All right, Scott, continue.
So we also heard comments from our business partners and stakeholders, as well as the Hillsborough Planning Commission, that not only looking at access to stations, but maybe there's an opportunity during the PD&E to either look at consolidating or removing some of the stations from that concept. We had some great workshops with the Hillsborough Planning Commission. You know, they were really looking at, you know, we preliminarily recommended an area around Hillsborough Avenue. They were very interested in potentially looking at Bird Street as maybe an option for that station between, you know, that sort of key community connection point between USF and downtown Tampa. Same conversation between West Shore and Tampa, where the Planning Commission is really looking at, you know, Himes Avenue, obviously with the Midtown development occurring there, you know, how can we sort of leverage those partnerships? And so I think, again, these are great questions for the next phase, which when the PD&E occurs, the key questions that need to be answered there is how much dedicated lane investment are we really talking about as part of this project when it's implemented? Where exactly are the stations? How do we ensure that we get the TOD around those stations? How do we get to and from the interstate to get access to the stations? But I mean access not just from the service itself, but pedestrian access, bike access, community access as well. Also looking at the opportunity for funding and phasing strategies during that PD&E. So the PD&E itself, which is the next step, is generally an 18 to 24 month process, you know, approximately about 2 years. The Florida Department of Transportation already has $5 million in its work program ready to fund that PD&E. And during that PD&E, you're going to look at completing your environmental compliance. You're going to do all of your preliminary engineering, getting ready for final design. And you're going to look to get into the FTA program and get your rating to be applicable for those federal and state grant dollars. So I'm going to take you from November out and look out through the next couple of steps, sort of that critical path as it relates to that PD&E. So if the catalyst, when the catalyst is approved by TBARTA and is advanced to the catalyst to PD&E here in November.
I can't help it. Only one.
Ideally, what we're looking at is about 3 to 6 month process, so December to spring timeframe to get that agreement with FDOT to execute those $5 million. And of course, you need during that time frame to select a consultant to do the work for the PD&E. But then about spring to summertime is really that first leg of the PD&E. And it's at this point you're going to be absolutely defining what those design alternatives or options are, those phasing options. You're going to begin thinking about how the project, how it can be funded, what are the strategies for funding that project. And at the conclusion of that first step of the PD&E, then you're going to go to FTA. You're going to ask for approval to enter into the grant program. Upon acceptance into the federal grant program, you're going to have about 14 to 18 months of completing NEPA, doing your preliminary engineering, securing those funding commitments to implement the project. And by the end of that 24-month process, you're going to want MPO consensus for inclusion of that project into the long-range transportation plan. So with that, that's kind of a quick look at next steps, moving beyond here, where we stand here in November. And I only end in this last slide and open it up to further questions and conversation. This is the actual resolution that I believe is going in front of the board next week. So with that, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Scott. That was an excellent overview. Board members, any questions for Scott? Follow-up thoughts?
I think we'll have lots of questions once we have sufficient time to go through it and formulate them. And I do envision plenty of time for those questions to be answered going forward, correct? When do you expect, what's the time frame in your head, Scott, before the PD&E, for example, would be completed?
We definitely would have it completed within 2 years. So we're talking about summer, fall, I believe 2020.
Wow.
And that's after notice to proceed with the PD&E and funding for the project consultant.
Correct. You're going to probably have a good 3 to 6 months of procurement before you can initiate that PD&E.
So we really need to get working on that.
Just for the record,
go ahead.
I just, you know, for the whole year, there's been misrepresentations about the CSX, but it doesn't matter, you know, whatever, gross misrepresentations, but just for the record, I'd like to state that again. But also, I just don't see any support in Hillsborough County for a regional parking garage plan, which is what this is, Taj Mahal Regional Parking Garage Plan. And I mean, I'll just be clear, not that I don't think that the $5 million won't be allocated to do this, to do the PD&E, but you know, I'll just be clear that that's where, you know, that's what I think is, yeah, to me, to take the $5 million and waste it on that instead of investing it in operations like, you know, I believe that FDOT should be funding the regional express bus service, and that's it. But and you know, if other people want to build regional parking garages in their counties, then you know, I think that they could look at that part of it. But I'll just that's my comments.
Thank you. Any other comments for Scott? Not recognizing any. I'm going to move. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I would just like to move that we do recommend to the board that we approve the resolution for the as it is written for the project development and PD&E to go forward, because that's the next step before we can get any of the rest of our plan or questions or whatever addressed, correct?
Well, we can't move and we can't second, we can't vote.
No,
But I
recommend
Yep, and I understand that. So what we'd have from today's discussion is the recorded thoughts from Commissioner Kemp, yourself. Of course, I'm also in support. I'm a rubber tire guy, so from my perspective, I would strongly support moving forward with the PD&E. The feasibility plan's nothing without it. You really can't do anything until you get a PD&E completed. So the next step is logical to me, and I think there's a lot of benefits for the region in what they've put together in this feasibility analysis. It doesn't solve all the issues related to. It doesn't solve all the issues related to rail versus rubber tire, and those issues will be debated for generations to come until they're resolved. But from my perspective, to get started in regional transportation transit opportunities, I really like the recommendation that came out of this report personally. So we can record those in our minutes and pass them along to the board. I'll be glad to do that as the chair of the committee so that the board knows the things we both talked about, and Commissioner Kemp's thoughts will also be recognized. So with that, I'd like to move to discussion item number 2, Hyperloop Transportation Technologies.
Clint,
Yes,
I just would like to say that I support that as well. I support I don't view this as a versus, I view it as the first step, and I think that we need to get started on the PD&E, so I recommend that we proceed as proposed.
Cliff, this is Sue.
That also will be noted. Thank you.
Would you like me to call the roll on the consensus of this issue?
yes.
We could note a consensus, and if you would do that for us, it'd be great. Again, it's not a vote, just a consensus of the board's opinion.
Okay.
So please do so, Susan.
Cliff Manuel?
I can't vote, but my consensus is that I'd like to move forward with the PD&E.
Commissioner Kemp?
No.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey?
Why are we recording a
Yes.
vote?
Just for consensus purposes.
We're not voting.
Oh.
We're not voting.
just putting it in the record.
This is not a vote, so if it's confusing anything legally, I prefer not to complete it. I can recommend, Susan, I can update the board with the consensus I've heard today as part of my, they'll call on me to provide them an update on what we talked about. Let's just leave it there. It feels kind of like a vote, and I don't want to confuse anything.
No problem.
So I've heard from the members, and and also will recognize the members that would like to speak to the board. So each member's thoughts will be passed along. Thank you. Discussion item number 2, Hyperloop Transportation Technologies. Cesar Hernandez, you with us today?
Yes.
Is Cesar on board today?
Yes.
I did not hear him get on.
Yes. Good morning.
Oh.
I am here.
Good morning.
Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Good, thank you.
We're just here. We've had various discussions with TBARTA. We initially met with various different board members of the initial policy committee. We also met with the Citizens Advisory Committee to ask for a resolution in support of Hyperloop technology, not a specific company, but just the technology itself, to be explored within the TBARTA jurisdiction. And we've also had a full presentation to the entire board. And now we are here once again, looking to, I guess, perhaps either have a discussion, if there's any more questions in relation to this item.
Mr. Chair, I have a question of Mr. Zimmett. I think he's either there or on the line. Did I not hear that he announced himself during the roll?
I'm here, Commissioner.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes.
Joining the meeting.
Please.
So, Alan, as it relates to this resolution that we are moving forward, Is this setting a precedent for several other technologies that are also out there that have come, for example, to me at least, and asked if we were in a position to support their efforts? I mean, we don't know for certain how this technology will actually work in an existing line. Do we, Caesar? I mean, it hasn't actually been built yet, right?
So currently we're underway in a feasibility study at the Great Lakes. That will be done in 3 months. Once they do a feasibility study in the Great Lakes, they will do an environmental impact study, which would take an additional 6 months. But within 3 months, we'll be able to see and compare apples to apples what a cost to build would be in the United States. Next year, Q2 of next year, they will have the first functional Hyperloop line in Toulouse, France. Really why we are
right,
here.
I know all of that.
Correct.
My question is, today, there is not an existing viable line that's already been built, correct?
Correct.
Yes
all
or no?
feasibility studies, correct, that's correct.
Okay. That's all I wanted to know, because I just worry that we are setting a precedent for moving things forward that we don't really know for sure are viable. Is that unreasonable, Alan?
Well, this is just, I mean, the board, if it were to approve the resolution, is not taking any official action other than adopting a resolution in support of the technology and pursuing the technology. So I don't know that it's not really.
Well, how do we know we support it when it hasn't been proven yet?
Well, I mean, that's obviously a policy decision for the board members to make, and you may decide because of that reason not to approve the resolution and wait and see.
Well, I guess that's my question. Am I the only one that has a question about that? I'm just asking.
So, it's Cliff Manuel. From my perspective,
Yeah.
After I heard Caesar's presentation to the board, the first thing that I wondered is, how in the world does this thing work? And I have to do a lot more research to understand exactly what he's talking about. I just have not personally stayed up with it to a point where he was talking to an informed board member. Before I just support a resolution, I would need to be informed from my personal perspective so I could vote on it logically.
Correct. And
Catherine?
any questions on that, we'll be more than happy to respond. I know that we've been having very robust discussions, I think, for the past 6 months. So if there's any concerns on the technology or any questions, we would bring that to surface.
But Caesar, my point is we don't know enough to know if there are any concerns or questions, because there's nothing that we can touch, feel, or see except a presentation.
Correct.
That's my point.
Yes, correct. And the resolution is primarily just for the exploration of future Hyperloop technology. It's not really saying that this would happen in the region. It really is just dictating that we are open to new technologies in the foreseeable future. That's really the ask. It's not a determinant factor as far as like, is this happening? And that's really what the way that the language in the resolution is kind of written out.
I think what just if I can clarify from my perspective, because Commissioner Long and I are thinking similarly, if it said, we were going to support a resolution on transportation technologies, then I wouldn't really have an issue with it because it wouldn't be saying a lot, but it says Hyperloop. So as soon as it says Hyperloop, to me that means something. And I just don't know enough about it yet, Caesar, to fully support the resolution. But I can tell you this, I'm an engineer by trade. I do a lot of research. I like to read. And since your presentation, I'm trying to understand it better to see if I think it would fit a proper footprint for transit in the United States. And so that's where I'm at right now. I'm certainly not against anything. I haven't learned enough about it to be one way or the other.
And to your point, Yeah, to your point, Mr. Chair, I agree with you totally.
Joining the
And
meeting.
My biggest concern is that perception becomes reality, and in the eyes of a lot of people, the fact that it specifically says Hyperloop could be perceived that we are endorsing or, you know, supporting the particular model and not considering a whole bunch of other tech. I mean, I'm all about technology and supporting moving forward. I just am very cautious about identifying a number one vendor when we don't even know yet what else is out there.
Yeah, I think those are awesome conclusions. Of some of the things that we did, for instance, in Pasco wasn't specific to Hyperloop. It was Hyperloop, SkyTran, as well as new disruptive technologies that are coming to surface. And we are definitely open to, I mean, I'm really an advocate of the exploration of new technologies and how they can advance the region. And we're very open to however that language should look like. Doesn't have to just be directly of one specific technology, but it can be expansive, and definitely not opposed to that. We're looking to really formulate a partnership here as opposed to just saying it needs to be one company, one technology. I'm a proponent of any kind of technology that would advance our region forward. So we're 100% open to that, Commissioner.
Then I would be all for it if you did that, just changed it to open it up to that we're very supportive of the new emerging technology. Excellent.
Yeah.
Good discussion. Thank you.
Awesome. So I guess
Any other comments, questions for Caesar, or you continue, please?
No, what I was saying that I can go back and work with staff, and we can possibly rework language to have it more inclusive of other technologies. That would not be an issue at all.
Good.
Please do so. I think that's what we've heard today from the policy committee by consent. And I think it'd be helpful for all of us to kind of expand that. I would like to continue to learn about the technology. So I appreciate your efforts in educating us as well.
No.
Discussion item number 3. Go ahead, Caesar. I'm sorry. Close out.
I said that's, and I think that is our role here, is to educate and really just create a framework of innovation that's conducive for, as these technologies are explored and being deployed, we would be an area that would be receptive to it. And that's really what we're looking to, is working in partnership, moving together forward.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the information today and the continued follow-up. Discussion item number 3, participation in FRS, our Florida retirement system. I'm not sure if Deborah or David's going to take the lead. I see both names.
This is Debbie Elias. I'm the CFO of PSTA, and I'll be talking on this item today. You have to leave it to the CFO to
Thank you very much.
Back down on the ground on something that's happening now. And when we went through the
Good morning.
Good morning.
I said good morning and thank you.
You're welcome. When we went through the budget process, this is one of the items that we discussed. I think it's very important that we look to the future, and we have a catalyst within Mr. Green, who is now our new executive director of TBARTA, to move things forward. And by having the employees of TBARTA become a member or participant of the FRS, I think you'll be able to attract new talent into TBARTA as well as help existing talent that is there. We included in the budget the employer contribution of 8.26%. The employees would contribute 3%. Currently, there are a couple employees who participate in a deferred compensation plan that will continue to be offered, but will go away as TBARTA's contribution to that deferred compensation plan. Instead, everyone will become a member of the FRS. We felt this was important enough, even though it's a very easy administrative lift for us to do, because this is a new policy, it's a new day at TBARTA, and that is why we wanted it to bring it to the policy committee. Are there any questions?
I think it's an excellent idea. Wholeheartedly approve.
All right. right, I'm not hearing.
Any other comments from board members? Mr. Kemp?
No, I have no comments.
Anybody? All good?
I support it. I support it as well. I think it's a great idea.
I also do.
Same here, Commissioner
It's an
Stark.
excellent idea. Thank you very much,
You're welcome.
Debbie. I appreciate it. Item number 6, future meeting subjects. Any? Board members?
Well, I think we need to continue to explore these new technology, ideas. I mean, Hyperloop is one. There's probably other out there, and just continue the education of the effort. And I'm sure now that David's on board and getting his sea legs, he'll have some additional ideas for us in terms of things to look at.
And I think if we just simply change the resolution to say transit transportation technologies, we probably can get there with a broad brush so that we can point the board in the right direction to know that technology is going to be a part of this transit solutions.
Right, we send a signal, and I mean, what's not out there today could be out there tomorrow, and so I agreed with all that. I think that's an important signal to send.
Any other business or board member comment?
I do have a question, if I might ask. Do we know today if we have a quorum for our board meeting next week?
Susan?
I do not. I will check that out and report back.
I think that would be mightily important. We have a lot of big business to take care of.
Agreed. And Susan's also going to get out the transit feasibility plan for us via email so we can all be up to speed on that. I will recommend that we go over it before the board meeting so we can talk intelligently about our support and concerns. Any other business? Motion for adjournment?
Move to adjourn and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Is there a second? Don't really need one. We'll be adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Cliff. Good job. Bye.
Have a good day.